I remember the exact moment the air changed in our apartment. It wasn't loud. That's what people always get wrong about the fights that actually matter, the ones that crack something permanent. They imagine screaming, broken dishes, doors swinging off hinges. But the worst arguments I've ever lived through have been almost quiet, controlled. Like two people carefully placing explosives while pretending they're just rearranging furniture. Vanessa had been distant for 3 weeks. Not completely gone. She was still there, still sleeping beside me, still laughing at the right moments when we watched TV together. But there was a film over everything. A kind of translucent wall I kept pressing my hands against and pretending wasn't there. I told myself it was stress. Her job had been brutal. Her mother had been sick. I gave her every reasonable excuse I could manufacture, because manufacturing excuses felt better than sitting with the alternative. That Tuesday night started like any other. I'd made dinner. Nothing impressive, just pasta, the kind of meal you make when you're tired but still trying. She came home late, still in her coat, and sat at the kitchen table without taking it off. That detail stayed with me. She sat down with her coat on, like she wasn't planning to stay. She didn't eat much. I talked too much to fill the silence about my day, about something I'd read, about a plan for the weekend. She smiled in the right places, but her eyes were somewhere else entirely. It was after dinner when I was washing the dishes and she was standing in the doorway between the kitchen and the living room that she said it. "I've been thinking." I turned off the faucet. I don't know why, instinct maybe. Some primitive part of me that recognized the frequency of those words and knew I needed my full attention available. "About us," she continued. I dried my hands slowly on the dish towel. I turned around and leaned against the counter. I looked at her, and I tried to keep my face open, neutral, safe, the kind of face that says you can say anything to me. Even though my chest had already started doing that thing it does, that slow tightening like something's being wrung out. "I don't think this is working anymore," she said. "I don't think I'm happy. And I don't think you're happy either, even if you won't admit it." I didn't respond right away. I let the words land. I let them find their place in a room. "I've been feeling like we're just going through the motions," she went on. Her voice was steady, which somehow made it worse. Steady meant she'd practiced. Steady meant she'd been sitting with this a long time. Like we're roommates who are affectionate sometimes. Like we stopped choosing each other and just started coexisting. And here's the thing, she wasn't entirely wrong. I knew it. Some part of me had known it for a while. But knowing something and being ready to face it are two completely different countries. "I think I need to leave," she said. "Tonight. I need to go stay somewhere else for a while and just think, figure out what I actually want." She paused. And then she said the part that I replay in my head more than anything else. "Don't try to stop me." The room was very still. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere outside, a car passed. I could feel my own heartbeat in my fingertips, that particular pulsing that only happens when the body recognizes real danger before the mind is fully caught up. I looked at her, really looked at her. Her jaw was set. Her eyes were bright in that way eyes get when someone has been quietly crying before a hard conversation, that leftover luminosity. She was standing in her coat. She had already decided. And I understood in that moment that the worst thing I could do, the absolute most destructive thing, was to make this about me. To beg. To argue. To list every reason she should stay. To grab onto her with both hands and make her feel guilty for needing air. I'd done that before. In a different relationship, years ago. I'd held on so tight I'd crushed the thing I was trying to save. I wasn't going to do it again, that I said one word. "Okay." Not aggressively. not coldly. I said it the way you say something when you mean it completely, quietly, from somewhere deep and real. I said it looking directly at her, without flinching, without letting my voice crack. Okay. She blinked. Whatever she had been bracing for, a fight, a plea, an argument, tears, the word okay was not it. I watched it land on her like something unexpected, like a step she'd prepared to be higher than it was. For just a second, she looked almost off balance. Okay, she repeated. And there was something in her voice I couldn't quite read. Not relief. Not exactly. Something more complicated than that. I heard you, I said. If you need to go, go. I'm not going to stand in your way. She stared at me. That's it? You're not going to say anything? And here is where it gets complicated, where what was happening inside me and what was visible on my face became two entirely different things. Because the truth is, I had about 9,000 things I wanted to say. I wanted to say, please don't go. I wanted to say, I know I've been pulling away too. I know I've been tired and distracted and less present than I should be. And I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. Just give me a chance to be better. I wanted to say, I still choose you. I'm still choosing you right now. Even as you're standing in your coat at 9 p.m. telling me you're leaving. I choose you, but I had learned something hard and true about love in the years before Vanessa. I had learned that desperation is not the same as devotion. That holding someone hostage with your need is not the same as loving them. That sometimes the most profound act of love is to open your hands. So instead of any of those 9,000 things, I said, I think what you're feeling is real, and I'm not going to dismiss it. If space is what you need, then that's what I want you to have. She looked at me for a long moment. Something moved across her face, something I still don't have a complete word for. It was like watching someone who had prepared for a battle suddenly realize the battlefield was empty. I'll be at my sister's, she said finally. Okay, I said again. Text me when you get there so I know you're safe. She opened her mouth, closed it, picked up the small bag she must have packed before I got home. God, she'd packed a bag before dinner. She'd sat across from me with pasta in front of her knowing she had a bag waiting by the door, and she walked out. The door closed behind her. Not slammed, just closed. And I stood in the kitchen alone, in the quiet, with the dish towel still in my hands, and I let myself feel the full weight of what had just happened. It was enormous. The quiet was enormous. The apartment, which had always felt just the right size for two people, suddenly felt like an airplane hangar. I walked to the couch and sat down. I didn't turn on the TV. I didn't look at my phone. I just sat there and breathed and let the grief move through me like weather, because that's all you can do with grief. Really. You can't argue it out of the room. You just have to let it pass through. I thought about the first night she'd ever stayed over. How she'd borrowed my oversized sweatshirt and looked so at home in it that I remembered thinking, this person fits here. I thought about the trip we took to the coast 2 summers ago, how we'd eaten fish tacos on a pier, and she'd laughed so hard at something I'd said that she'd grabbed my arm to stay upright, and how that was one of the best moments of my life. Not because of anything dramatic, just because of the pure specific joy of being the person who made her laugh like that. I sat with all of it. And then when I was ready, I picked up my phone. And I made the call. Here is who I did not call. Her. I know that's the first thing you assumed. That I called Vanessa. That I broke my own word within 5 minutes. That I did the desperate thing I'd sworn I wouldn't do. But no. I let her go. I meant it when I said I'd let her go. Here is who I called instead. My older brother, Marcus. Marcus is 8 years older than me, and he has been, at various points in my life, my most frustrating person, and my most necessary one. He's the kind of man who doesn't soften things unnecessarily, but also never says something cruel. He has this quality I've always envied, the ability to be honest without being unkind. It's rarer than people think. He picked up on the second ring. What's wrong? I didn't even bother with small talk. Vanessa just left. Took a bag. Said she needed space, needed to think. Said she didn't think the relationship was working. A brief silence. Not an uncomfortable one. Marcus's silences never are. He's just a person who thinks before he speaks, which is a quality I am still working on. Did you try to stop her? He asked.
No.
Good, he said. And there was something in his voice, not approval exactly, but recognition. Like I'd passed a test I hadn't known I was taking. I don't know what to do, I said. And I meant it in the largest possible sense. Not just tonight, not just the next hour. I meant it about all of it, the distance that had built up between us, the way we'd both been operating at half capacity for months, the way love can become something you're maintaining instead of something you're living. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Can I tell you what I think, or do you just need to talk? Tell me what you think." "I think," he said carefully, "that you've been afraid. And I think she's been afraid. And I think two afraid people in a relationship will eventually stop reaching for each other, because reaching feels too risky when you're scared. And then one day one of them reaches their limit and calls it quits because quitting feels safer than being the one who tries and fails." I let that sit. "Which one of you stopped reaching first?" he asked. And that question, that simple, direct, unsparing question, hit me like cold water. Because I knew the answer. I knew it immediately and completely, the way you know things you've been carefully avoiding. I had pulled back first. Months ago, after a smaller argument, one that I had told myself was resolved but that I'd actually just buried. I had decided, quietly and without announcing it, that it was safer to be a little less vulnerable, a little less open. I had started protecting myself in increments so small I'd convinced myself I wasn't doing it at all. And Vanessa, who is perceptive in the way that people who grew up in unpredictable households often are, had felt every single millimeter of that withdrawal. And she had responded the only way that made sense. She had started protecting herself too. We had both been building walls and calling it stability. "Marcus," I said, "what do I do? Tonight?"
"Nothing," he said.
"Tonight you sit with yourself and you get honest. Not with her, with yourself. About what you actually want, about what you've been doing wrong, about whether you're willing to do the work it would take to be different. Because she doesn't need your promises right now. She needs to know that when you show up, if you show up, you'll be showing up as someone who has actually done something with this time. Not just someone who missed her." We talked for another hour. About the relationship, about fear, about the particular way that men like me, men who grew up learning that emotion was a liability, tend to sabotage the very things we love most by going emotionally absent just when we're needed most. He told me things about his own marriage, things I hadn't known, hard and true things that made me feel less alone in my failure and more accountable to it at the same time. When we hung up, it was past midnight. The apartment was dark. I hadn't moved from the couch, but something had shifted. Something internal, tectonic, quiet. The kind of shift that doesn't make noise but changes the entire landscape that I didn't sleep much that night. Not in the catastrophizing way, not lying awake running disaster scenarios. More like sitting at the edge of something large and trying to take its full measure. Around 1 a.m., my phone lit up. "Vanessa, I'm here. I'm safe." 3 words and a period. But she'd sent it. She'd remembered that I'd asked. Something in me, Something small and stubborn and hopeful. Held on to that. I typed back. Thank you for letting me know. Sleep well. I put the phone face down and sat with the silence some more. Here's the thing about silence when you're used to filling it. It teaches you things. It teaches you what you've been drowning out. I had been filling every quiet moment for months, with noise, with plans, with busyness, with surface-level conversation, because underneath the surface, there was something I didn't want to look at. The fear that I had become someone she couldn't fully reach. The fear that I had learned, somewhere in the years before her, that being fully seen was dangerous, and I had never fully unlearned it. I thought about the last time we'd had a real conversation. Not a logistical one. Not who's picking up groceries or did you call the landlord, but a real one, the kind where you say things that actually cost you something. I couldn't remember it. I couldn't pinpoint the last time I had looked at her and said something true that scared me even a little. That was the problem. Not a single dramatic failure. 1,000 quiet withdrawals. I got up at some point and made tea I didn't want, just to have something to do with my hands. I stood at the kitchen window and looked at the street below, empty and orange-lit, and I thought about who I wanted to be. Not what I wanted to say to her, not what strategy would bring her back, who I actually wanted to be. Because Marcus was right. She didn't need my words right now. She needed me to actually change. And change doesn't happen in declarations. It happens in the private moments when no one's watching, when there's no audience, when the only person you're accountable to is yourself. I went to the desk I rarely used, and I got a piece of paper. Actual paper, not a note in my phone. Paper, the physical kind that makes things feel real. And I wrote. Not to her. To myself. I wrote down every moment in the past year where I had chosen safety over honesty with her. Every time she had reached toward me, and I had given her a version of myself instead of the real thing. Every time I had felt something important and had translated it into something smaller and more manageable before sharing it, or not shared it at all. It took a long time. The list was longer than I wanted it to be. Then I wrote down what I was going to do differently. Specific things. Not vague intentions, but actual, concrete changes. Ways of showing up. Things I needed to say. Patterns I needed to interrupt. It wasn't a perfect list. It wasn't polished. It was honest, which is better. By the time I finished, it was almost 4 a.m. I folded the paper and put it in my wallet. Not to show her. Not as evidence. Just as a reminder to myself. A private contract. Then I went to bed. And for the first time in months, my sleep was deep and still. She came back on the third day. Not because I called her. Not because I flooded her phone with messages. I sent her one text, the morning after she left, that said, I've been thinking. I have some things I want to say when you're ready to hear them. No pressure, no timeline. I'm here. She didn't respond to it immediately. That was okay. I wasn't sending it to get a response. I was sending it because it was true. On the third day, late in the afternoon, I heard her key in the lock. I was at the kitchen table with coffee and a book I had not been reading. My heart did something complicated in my chest. I kept my hands still and my face open. She came in and stood in the doorway, the same spot, and looked at me. She looked tired. She also looked, somehow, like more of herself than she had in weeks. Like the time alone had given her back some part of her that proximity to our problems had been slowly compressing.
Hi, she said.
Hi, I said. Do you want some coffee? She almost smiled.
Yeah.
I made her coffee, and we sat across from each other at the kitchen table, and this time there was no pretending. No comfortable noise to fill the space. Just the two of us, and everything that needed to be said. She went first. She told me about the 3 days. what she'd thought about, what she'd felt, the conversations she'd had with her sister. She told me that she'd almost convinced herself it was over, that she'd lain awake the first night rehearsing what a clean ending would look like, trying to make herself believe she wanted one. But the more she'd tried to picture her life without me in it, the more she'd realized that what she wanted wasn't an ending. She wanted a different beginning. She wanted us, but a version of us that was actually honest. Then she said something that stayed with me. When I left and you didn't fight me on it, I was angry at first. Like, really angry. Like, that's it? You're just going to let me walk out? But then I was driving to my sister's and I realized I was angry because I was scared. I was scared you didn't care enough to stop me. And then I thought about it more, and I realized I had asked you not to stop me. I had asked you to let me go, and you respected that, and somehow that was the thing that actually made me feel safe.
She paused.
Does that make sense? Yeah, I said. It does. I needed to know, she said slowly, that you could let me be a person. That you wouldn't just grab me and hold on because you were scared. I've been in relationships like that before, where someone's love felt more like a cage than a choice. And I've been waiting, I think, for you to do that.
To grab and hold and make it about you.
And you didn't. I took a breath. I almost did, I said. For about 3 seconds, I almost launched into every reason you should stay. I had the whole speech ready in my head. What stopped you? I remembered that I'd done it before, in a different relationship a long time ago, and it hadn't saved anything. It had just made the other person feel guilty for having needs. And I didn't want to do that to you. She looked at me for a long moment. Then I told her about the call to Marcus. I told her about the conversation, about the question he'd asked, which one of you stopped reaching first, and about my answer. I told her I knew I had been the one. I told her about the list I'd written in the middle of the night, and I didn't show it to her, but I told her it existed, and I told her what was on it. I didn't make excuses. I didn't contextualize. I just said it plainly. I had been afraid, and my fear had made me absent, and she had felt that absence, and she had been right to name it. She was quiet for a long time after I finished. Why didn't you just say that before? She asked. Her voice was soft, not accusatory, genuinely wondering. Because saying it would have meant admitting how scared I was, I said. And I didn't know how to do that without feeling like I was handing you something you could use to hurt me. I wouldn't have used it to hurt you. I know that now. I think I knew it then, too. I just wasn't ready to trust it. She reached across the table and put her hand over mine. And that gesture, small, quiet, completely voluntary, felt like more than any dramatic reunion could have. It felt like a choice. Deliberate. Present. Real. I don't want to leave, she said. I want to try.
For real this time.
But I need you to actually be here. Not just physically. Actually here. I know, I said. I want to be. And if it gets hard again, and it will get hard again, I need you to talk to me instead of disappearing into yourself. Even if what you're feeling is messy. Even if you're scared. Especially if you're scared. Okay, I said. And this time when I said it, it didn't sound like letting go. It sounded like arriving. There is a version of that night that goes differently. In that version, I chase her to the door. I grab her arm, gently but still. I list every reason she should stay. I make it about my pain, my fear, my need. Maybe it works. Maybe she stays that night, worn down by my desperation, and we go to bed in that horrible aftermath of a fight way, neither of us resolved, both of us just too exhausted to continue. And maybe that version of us limps along for another few months before it collapses under its own unaddressed weight. Or she stays because I guilt-tripped her into it, and some part of her never forgives me for not letting her go when she needed to. I have thought about that version a lot. I am grateful it doesn't exist. What I learned from that night, from all of it, from the silence and the call to Marcus and the list in the middle of the night and the coffee 3 days later, is something I probably should have understood years ago, but that I had to live through to actually know in my bones. Love is not a grip. It's not something you maintain by holding tighter when you feel it slipping. That impulse, to squeeze harder when you're afraid of losing something, is fear dressed up as devotion. And the people we love can feel the difference. Real love, the kind that actually sustains something across years and difficulty and the inevitable seasons of distance, is a practice of openness. Of letting someone be a full human being with needs and doubts and moments where they need air. Of trusting that if you open your hands, the right thing won't disappear, and if it does, no amount of holding on would have truly kept it. The call I made that night was the best call I've made in a long time. Not because my brother gave me a magic answer, but because I asked for help instead of trying to white-knuckle my way through alone. Because I let someone who loved me tell me a true and uncomfortable thing, and I let it change me. Vanessa and I are still together. We are different now, more careful with each other in the good ways, more honest in the ways that actually matter. We talk about the hard things before they become impossible things. We reach for each other. And on the nights when one of us starts to pull back, we've gotten better at naming it instead of letting it quietly accumulate. It is not a perfect story. It is a real one. And it started with a word I almost didn't say. Okay. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do for the person you love is trust them enough to let them go, and trust yourself enough to do the work while they're gone.